We often think of our minds and our bodies as two totally separate things, right? The thinking part and the doing part. But what if they're in a constant, secret conversation with each other? Today, we're going to go back in time, way back, to a clinic in Zurich in 1907, where a young C.G. Jung used this surprisingly simple machine to basically eavesdrop on that exact conversation. This is the story of his groundbreaking work and the search to measure something nobody thought was measurable.
I mean, seriously, think about that question. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But it's the very question that obsessed the first explorers of the human mind. What if every little flicker of emotion, every memory you try to push down, sends out a physical signal? A signal that someone could actually measure? What if your body is basically broadcasting your secrets for anyone with the right tool to see?
So, long before he became the famous Carl Jung of archetypes in the collective unconscious, he was a really rigorous hands-on scientist. He was working with his colleague Charles Richter, and they were trying to put psychology on solid empirical ground. Their main tool was something called a galvanometer, which is just a device that measures electric current. And their big idea was to find a real physical bridge between what we feel inside and how our bodies react on the outside.
Okay, so what they were really focused on was this weird phenomenon that had puzzled researchers for years. Scientists had noticed that the electrical properties of our bodies seemed to change all the time for no obvious reason. They knew there was a signal there, but they had no idea where it was coming from or, more importantly, what it meant. It was like a ghost in the machine of the human body.
This right here was the heart of the mystery they were trying to solve. When a person experienced something, could be a sudden noise, could be a complex thought, the electrical resistance of their skin would just drop. It would become a better conductor of electricity. So the big question was why? What was actually happening in the body to cause this?
The first guess seemed pretty logical. Maybe emotions change the blood flow in your skin, and that, in turn, changes its electrical resistance. Makes sense, right? But Jung and his team were real scientists. They weren't just going to guess. They needed proof.
So they ran this series of really brilliant elimination tests. First up, blood supply. They used a special bandage to completely stop the blood flow to a subject's arm. And guess what? The galvanic phenomenon still showed up. Okay, so it's not blood. Next, they thought, well, maybe it's just tiny changes in pressure on the electrodes. So they had subjects dip their hands in water to get perfect, even contact. Nope, the effect was still there. Finally, they started testing different parts of the body, and they hit the jackpot. The signal was way stronger on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet, exactly where we have the most sweat glands.
And that was the breakthrough, the aha moment. The signal wasn't coming from blood or pressure, it was sweat. But not like beads of sweat. It's a super subtle, invisible layer of moisture from glands that are wired directly into our sympathetic nervous system. The part that controls our fight-or-flight response, our deepest emotions. For the very first time, psychologists had a direct, measurable link to the unconscious physical stuff that happens when we think. The machine was measuring our emotional sweat.
So now that they knew what they were measuring, Jung had to figure out the why. He and Richter came up with this really precise, multi-stage experiment to systematically poke and prod both the body and the mind, all while measuring the results.
The whole setup was just so elegant. They'd start by having the person sit quietly, just to get a baseline reading. Then, suddenly, a startling noise, a weight dropping. After that, they moved into more and more complex psychological triggers. They'd have people talk, show them simple things like a picture or blow a whistle, and then they'd move on to proverbs, and finally, to sentences that were personal and even critical of the subject.
First things first, they needed a control group. So they gathered 15 healthy, normal subjects, people who worked at the clinic, other doctors, and they hooked them up. The results from this group would show them what the baseline connection between thought and electricity looked like in a typical mind. Okay, now this is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Look at the numbers. A sudden, purely physical shock, that falling weight, it produces a reaction of about 20.6 millimeters. But then, just looking at a simple picture postcard, something that makes you think and remember things, that gets an even stronger reaction. And then, hearing a sentence that refers directly to you, that produced the biggest reaction of all. The message was crystal clear. The more personal the thought, the bigger the electrical signal.
And this led them to their central idea. The reaction wasn't really caused by the stimulus itself, but by what Jung called the affective complex. You can think of it as the unique, unconscious web of memories, feelings, and ideas that each of us attaches to something. A whistle isn't just a sound, right? It could be a memory of a childhood game, or a warning. The body wasn't reacting to the outside world. It was reacting to the mind's private interpretation of it.
But the most profound discoveries, the truly mind-blowing stuff, came when they turned the machine on patients who were suffering from various mental conditions. I mean, if the signal's all about our mental associations, what would happen in a mind where the ability to associate things was damaged, or even gone completely?
The difference they found was just stark. It was night and day. Healthy subjects, you get consistent electrical responses. But patients with severe dementia, the researchers noted they were electrically quiet. It was like the mind-body connection had been severed. To really nail this down, they compared two very specific groups of patients.
First, they measured subjects who had chronic alcoholism but showed no signs of dementia. These individuals were often in a state of high emotional excitability. So, when they were shown that same simple picture postcard, their average reaction was a whopping 28 millimeters, way higher than the healthy control group. Their emotional systems were clearly on high alert.
Now hold that number in your head. Next, they tested patients whose alcoholism had progressed into full-blown dementia. They used the exact same picture. And the result? A measly 7.6 millimeters. The response was almost totally gone. It was practically a flat line, which proved that the ability to actually process the picture was the critical missing piece.
This table really puts it all together so clearly. You see the baseline reaction in normal subjects. Then you see the amplified reaction in a state of high emotion. And then you see the almost complete collapse of that reaction when cognitive function is impaired. The data tells a really clear story, that physical response isn't automatic. It completely depends on the mind's ability to pay attention and make connections. When that's gone, the body's secret keeper just goes silent.
And as Jung himself concluded, when the mind loses its power to link something to an affective complex, a feeling, a memory, the physical signal just disappears right along with it. It's wild. In the most severe cases, they found that even the prick of a needle produced no measurable response.
So, what's the big takeaway here? What did this simple machine, more than 100 years ago, really reveal about the way our minds are put together?
Well, this one experiment basically laid out 4 huge principles. First, that this mind-body link isn't automatic. It needs both attention and association to work. Second, our internal psychological world can actually trigger a stronger physical reaction than something happening in the real world. Third, our emotional state is like a volume knob for this connection. It can turn it up or down. And finally, and this is maybe the most profound point, cognitive decline, like what you see in dementia, can literally physically sever this link, leaving the mind kind of isolated from its own body.
You know, Jung's experiment was basically the great-grandfather of the modern polygraph test. Of all the biometric sensors we have now, the whole field of affective computing, he proved, with just some simple electricity and brilliant logic, that our bodies and minds are in this constant, measurable dialogue. And that leaves us with a pretty serious question for today, doesn't it? If Jung could figure all this out with brass plates and a galvanometer over a century ago, what in the world are the sophisticated algorithms connected to our smartwatches, our phones, and our home assistants learning about our unconscious minds right now?